I want you to know that the person we'll be visiting with tonight is one of the smartest people, super smart. Anyone who goes to Stanford, of course, is. She's also was a child prodigy at age 6, as a violinist. We'll learn more about that. And an extraordinary career, taking her to Miss America, and then CBS, Fox, and now her own show. So it's quite a trajectory, but you'll also hear it's not always been linear, that like all of us, me, you perhaps, our careers have some bumps and jumps along the way. The real story, the book, some of you have had a chance, and we will now, could you shift us to a little introduction? This is a flashback for you, Gretchen, and see if we can make the technology work. Do you remember 1989 going and being interviewed, one of the thousands you did when you were Miss America? A guy who just went off the air, retired a little bit ago, David Letterman. Can we make it work, Dan?
Big night for us tonight.
A little
Miss
more
America is here. Miss America 1989. Recently crowned Saturday night in Atlantic City, right here on NBC in a 3-hour telecast, viewed by 60 million people. She's right here tonight. In fact, she's out here now. I mean, she'll be out here in a second when I introduce her. And I'm glad it's so quiet for her. For each of the 6 years that this program has been on the air, we have been delighted and honored to welcome the new Miss America. There she is right there. Tonight, despite seemingly insurmountable obstacles, that tradition lives on. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss America 1989, Gretchen Elizabeth Carlson. Congratulations.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very much for being here. You look great.
Well, thank you.
Now, when you hear that song, the Miss America theme song, there she is, Miss America, you must still get goosebumps, right?
Well, actually, that's only the second time I've heard it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Now, the first time you heard it, do you even hear it, or are you still in shock from the announcement that you've won?
I never heard it.
Is that right?
I got off the stage, I said, did Gary sing it this year?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people said that, even after having heard him. But now this year it was kind of odd, wasn't it? Because there was this thing at the end where they had the voting problem. What was that?
Well, actually, there was a tie between second and third runner-up.
All right.
And it had been previously planned that they were going to bring out the first runner-up and the winner to add to the suspense of the program.
The first runner-up and the winner. Right.
Right. That was previously planned. But then when there was a tie, and we had 12 minutes of agony there, everyone thought that the tie was between myself and the first runner-up,
Right.
which wasn't the case. But
So what was going through your mind at that point?
oh, loss of confidence. I'm sure all 10 of us were really examining inside of ourselves to find out, why we were really standing up there.
Yeah.
The whole time, the whole program, it goes so fast. And then all of a sudden you have 12 minutes to stand there and do nothing.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you would not believe the feelings that are going through your mind.
Yeah, well, that happens here frequently, so I kind of do have those feelings. But, watching at home, it was...
With that, would you please join us? Can I welcome you?
That was very sweet. He actually didn't play the part where Dave Letterman asked if I could go out on a date. At that point, I wasn't quite sure if I could as Miss America because it had only been a couple of days, so I said no. He also said that my hometown, he called it Anaka, like the breast spray, Banaka. I said, no, it's Anoka. But anyway.
Anoka, Minnesota, right?
Yes.
16,000 people. It is known infamously as what? The home of?
Well, it's the Halloween capital of the world.
Halloween capital of the world.
Yes, thank you for knowing that, David.
Yeah. And what does it actually mean? I mean, should I be scared being near you, or like you gonna?
No. Now, here's another part of the interview I'm glad you didn't play, because when he asked me why is Anoka, Minnesota, the Halloween capital of the world, I didn't exactly know the perfect answer. And let's just say that the Chamber of Commerce was very upset with me in Anoka. So I now know exactly why it is. It turns out that in the 30s and the 40s, the eve of Halloween used to be a very raucous time, I guess, in communities all across America, including my own. And my dad had lived there his whole life, so he knew the history very well. Anoka was the first town and community to come up with family-oriented programs the night before Halloween. to keep the kids inside with the parents. Imagine that. And keep them out of trouble from tomatoing houses and cars and that sort of stuff. And so Congress actually deemed my hometown then the Halloween capital of the world. And one time when my siblings and I, we were watching one of those game shows growing up, maybe it was the dating game or something like that, and the grand prize was coming to the Halloween capital of the world. And we all fell off our chairs and we were like, oh my gosh, do they have any idea what they're getting themselves into? This is not like, even going to Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Well, that's a long way, isn't it? From Anoka to Stanford to, of course, the contest and winning that and your extraordinary journalist career. And we'll touch on different parts of it tonight. But again, thank you on behalf of everyone. I want to start with your roots. Most of us, for better or worse, we're shaped by our family, our parents, our grandparents. Tell us a bit about your grandfather. He's a pretty special person, I think, in your life and the role he played.
He was. My grandfather was a Lutheran minister in my hometown. We're Swedish, and he grew up very modestly in southern Minnesota. He was one of 6 children and grew up on a dirt floor. He was the only one to go past the 7th grade.
Wow.
He happened to work at a church, and the school football coach from the high school saw him there, and he was a big, strapping young man. He said, "Have you ever played football?" And he said, no, he didn't even know what it was. Well, he said, you're going to play football for me, and you're going to live in the big city, which was Red Wing. Not a big city, but when you grow up in Vasa, Minnesota, it was huge. And so he lived with the coach, and he played high school football. He then got a full scholarship to Gustavus Adolphus College in Minnesota, where he played right guard, and then from that experience decided to dedicate his life to the Lord because he had met this man in the church. He taught me not only my religious foundation in my life, but he taught me amazing perseverance because of his own life story. And
in fact, that's one of your family sayings, is it?
Yeah,
Never give
never
up.
Give
right?
up.
Yeah.
Never, ever give up. He also taught me a good sense of humor because even though he was a minister, his favorite TV show was Benny Hill.
And then you go to David Letterman. Hey, it's perfect, right?
Exactly. But he was also, he was such a force in my life. And I used to love going to church because I could brag that, my grandfather, the rock star, was in the pulpit. And
he grew the church, right?
He did, and that was part of the perseverance story, was that when he came to this church, there were 800 members. And when he retired 34 years later, there were 8,500. And this was before megachurches. So, he really taught me these amazing life lessons that I've kept with me my entire life.
Yeah. And did you ever chafe at it? I mean, we talk about PKs or MKs, pastors' kids, ministers' kids, missionaries' kid. And for many of those, that there's a certain point where you kind of leave the reservation and you say, this is, I'm just tired of being the good kid. And you kind of go to the sidelines for a bit and maybe even reject faith completely. Did you go through that stage at all?
Mm-hmm. Good thing my mom's not here. Actually, my mom was the true pastor's kid.
Okay,
so
she was the wild one,
She has
huh?
more stories about that, and she skipped 3 grades. So when she was in 9th grade and asked to prom for the first time, she was 12. It was a bit of a problem, especially having a minister as your dad. But anyway, I spent so much time in the church growing up, David, and if I wasn't teaching Sunday school or singing in the church choir, I was performing my violin or piano almost every Sunday.
Yeah.
So there were services as 8, 9, 10, and 11, and I was there, the whole morning. My mom taught Sunday school. My dad and my mom, I believe, sang in the church choir. So we were just incredibly involved.
And you and your husband actually teach Sunday school together, don't you now?
Yes. My husband and I teach. We have 2 children, 10 and 12, and they love the fact that we teach Sunday school. In fact, they're very upset when it's not their turn. But
nice.
we trade off from year to year. And except this year, and I noticed Bill's here from church, my friend, you're not going to see me in the sanctuary very much this year, Bill, because I'm teaching 6th and 7th grade through Christmas, and then I'm teaching 5th grade through June. We're doing both of them this year.
That's great. That's great. So, but I want to talk briefly about the music stage of your life, because several times in your book, and you've commented that when you're when you're performing, when you and your violin are at one, some might say, it touches your soul in certain ways. When you started at 6 years old playing, and immediately people and skilled musicians and teachers recognized that you had amazing talent. Was it love at first sight with that half-sized violin you first played with, or did it take a while?
So I guess I wanted to play the piano, and I asked my mom, please, find me a piano teacher. And so we went up to the neighborhood piano teacher, and she took one look at my hands, and she said, she will never be any good at piano. Her hands are just way too small. And so I really started the violin almost as a fluke, because we went up to the local junior high, and I remember seeing all the stringed instruments hanging on the wall. I don't know why they did that, by the way, because the string bass was pretty big. And I knew I didn't want to play that. And I didn't want to play the cello. And the violin, I think because I was such a little kid at the time, it was the smallest stringed instrument. So by happenstance, I started playing. Within 3 months, the teacher said, I don't really know what to do with her. So I went to take lessons from his daughter. And after maybe 6 months to 9 months, she said, I don't know what to do with her. And so within a very short period of time, I was auditioning to be a student of one of the best teachers in the entire Midwest. So it just became this incredibly serious part of my life very, very quickly.
Right.
And I think this is such a great life lesson for all kids, for parents, is that music teaches amazing discipline. And whether it's music or sports or academics, kids learn from a very young age that when they put even a tiny amount of time into something, they get better. And they love that. You know, the self-confidence, you just see your child beaming when they feel good about something that they have invested in. And so now my children play the piano, and they don't really love to practice. And I honestly don't make them practice nearly at all what I used to practice, which is 3 or 4 hours a day. And my son will get through 10 minutes, and I try and get him to 15. But he loves the fact that when it's time to play at the recital, he's so proud of himself. And this is such a big, big lesson in my book, is teaching that discipline for kids. Even though I don't perform the violin anymore, I use that discipline every single day in what I do in my life.
So give an example of how you use that discipline in your, let's say when you're filming for your next show.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, the performance aspect is very similar. When I see the red light come on the camera, it's very analogous to how I used to feel walking out on stage, where I would actually see the audience there, but it's the same sort of euphoria feeling where I actually feel more comfortable than I do if I'm just having a conversation, one-on-one.
Right.
And the discipline, my goodness, in television news, especially in a live broadcast, you have to be so incredibly disciplined because you got to be on at that particular time.
And the casual throwaway line can kill all the good things you did. Right?
Yeah, but also you have to be prepared and ready to go because it's live. You can't say, I'm not really ready yet. And oftentimes the show totally goes out the window because there's breaking news, and you have to be disciplined enough within yourself to not show any anxiety or nerves to the audience. So the organizational skills that I developed from having to invest so much time in something as a child and still do all my schoolwork, and still I loved being in plays and drama, and that is something that I've carried with me my entire life.
So I'd like to link two parts with the Miss America contest and the role you have now. I believe one of the interview questions you were asked was prescient in a way. It was something to do with what did you think of media and politics?
Right. I've never watched my answer to it, still to this day.
I won't play it for you, although I've watched. But tell us a bit about the role from an ethics perspective. We're trying to, in this group, think of how do we perform our jobs well, be superb at what we do, and yet do it in a way that is God-pleasing, is decent, is ethical. Politics and media, that's a messy place sometimes. Talk a bit about that.
Well, first of all, my dad used to always say to me that people will know you're a Christian by the way you act. And it's so simplistic, but something that I think about on a daily basis. With regard to religion, something happened to me in my career. And I like to say that it was post-40, where I really have felt liberated about a lot of things. And specifically speaking out more about my faith on national television. I think it's a really interesting question for all of us, because if you're not doing a national TV show on a daily basis and you're just going to the office, that's different in how you exhibit your faith in the workplace. For me, it's really out there.
Yeah.
And there was a story that came up when I was doing Fox and Friends for 8 years that had to do with this made-up holiday around Christmas time that came from the Seinfeld show called Festivus. And it was incredibly funny. George made up this, holiday called Festivus. Well, it had come full circle to the fact that somebody had petitioned Washington State, the governor's office, to actually erect a Festivus pole next to the nativity scene during the Christmas season. And I was pretty outraged by this story because I thought it was sacrilegious, and it's, I have a sense of humor, but I didn't feel like we should be honoring this fake holiday next to the menorah and next to baby Jesus. And so that morning on the show, I really expressed my outrage. And my two colleagues were like, oh, it's just Seinfeld, you should be more lighthearted. I'm no, really. So that was the start of it, where I really started to speak out about it. And I took a tremendous amount of hits.
And were those hits from sort of external or your producer, your colleagues?
Oh, no, not my producer.
In-house? Because there's different audiences, right?
No, it's not in-house at all. I will say this, that Fox was the first place where I felt that I could speak openly about my religion and not take a hit from within.
Right.
And that was refreshing.
Actually, let me press on that. Do you think it's because you were at a new place in your own confidence, maybe, in your own faith journey, and that you could have done that at CBS, but you maybe just felt, maybe I shouldn't?
Totally different kinds of TV shows.
Right.
Fox and Friends was completely ad-lib for 3 hours.
True, yeah.
Much more conversational about cultural issues.
Right.
So I don't know if I would have even had that venue at CBS. Yeah. But I think it's a combination of things. Yeah. Where I took the hits were in the blogs. And it was suddenly unbelievable that I've written a column on it since when the book came out. I never knew it was criminal to be a Christian. It was unbelievable that suddenly, because I had stuck up for Christianity and the baby Jesus in the manger during Christmas time, no less, that somehow I was the villain. And I decided on that day that I wasn't going to stop doing what I was doing. And when the time presents itself, I do speak openly about my faith. I'm thinking back to January when we always have the president giving the State of the Union.
Right.
And that day on my show, I decided to do the spiritual State of the Union. And I can still remember that segment like it was yesterday, and I was just discussing with a gentleman here tonight that usually, I don't remember at all who I even interviewed today, because you're always moving on to the next day.
Yeah.
But I do try to find moments and interview segments that are appropriate to talk about faith in our culture. And certainly not to be a Bible thumper by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that it's important to have people on a national stage who are willing to do that.
It's interesting. It's two totally different orbits, but I think of my teaching work. I teach at a secular research university, as you know. And yet what I find the students embrace and their response to some of the courses I teach is if they're given intellectual permission that it's okay to have a thoughtful conversation about religion, be it mine, yours, or somebody else's, that it's okay. In fact, it enriches life. It enriches our growth. So it is interesting you say that. In the main, I find people respond well to it if it's delivered in the right way. Do you find that?
Oh, I find that, and thank you for reminding me of something that's just so important, is that while I have continued to take these massive hits from other sides of the media, and not that I spend all day long reading it, because why would anyone do that, but the most rewarding thing about being outspoken about it are the people that I meet on the streets. And the comments that I get via email or social media, the number one thing that people will say to me is, thank you so much for talking about your values and standing up for your faith in your position. And so I realize that I'm doing something right.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a really important life lesson, whether you're over 40 or not, that at some point you just have to really decide who you are. And that's why I signed my book, Always Believe in You. Because you are always going to be your best advocate, and sometimes you're going to be your only advocate. And it's a really important lesson for young people, too, that they need to learn how to stand up and speak with conviction and not to sway in what their feelings are. And, I wish I would have done it sooner.
Yeah. It reminds me of one of my favorite verses in the New Testament. Of course, I've got favorites in both Testaments, but it's in Peter where it talks about be prepared to make a gentle defense of that which you believe. And my favorite part is be prepared. Well, I guess the whole thing, be prepared to make a defense, but in other words, to articulate it in a thoughtful way, but gently of that which you believe. And I think that's what we believe matters. What we believe matters.
Mm-hmm.
Ethics. Of course, there's no ethical issues in the world of media, is there? What are two or three, maybe you could think of a particular example where perhaps after you did a story, or whether in the various stages, be it in your CBS days or now with Fox, either of your two roles at Fox, where afterwards you go, wow, I wish I could have a mulligans. That I didn't do that one well, or I crossed a line. Because I know you're self-critical. You're always trying to improve and grow. Can you share a time or two where you bumped into an ethical quandary, maybe in hindsight?
Yeah, probably. There was a story just this past year where I believe it was in Colorado, and there were kids who were protesting part of their curriculum. Mm-hmm. And I called them hoodlums. Probably shouldn't have done that. I do something on my show every day where for a minute I speak passionately about an issue of the day that has struck a nerve with me. It's called My Take. And it can be political, it can be cultural, it can be parenting advice, whatever it may be. But I think that day that I was speaking out against them because I didn't feel like they understood exactly why they were actually protesting. And so I called them probably a name that I shouldn't have. And boy, did my social media light up. From the parents, how could you dare call them that? You're a parent yourself. And I'm sure there's tons of more examples that I'm just not thinking of right now.
So one thing that maybe all of us have in our line of work, whether we're a trader, a hedge fund, or a professional services organization, conflict of interest is a big question. I spend a lot of time working with different companies and their ethics department, their chief ethics officer, trying to think through the question of what's a conflict of interest look like, and when do I, A, recognize it, and B, what do I do once I have one? You've often commented that you're registered independent, which sort of puts you in a place perhaps to speak with sort of removing one potential conflict of interest. How do you, on the one hand, hold true to your values, your belief system, be they religious or otherwise, and yet at the same time try to report a story neutrally, giving a decent representation of both sides of a story, where there might be a conflict of interest, where you think the person you're interviewing is an idiot, or a hoodlum, for example. How do you handle that kind of a conflict of interest, or maybe another one that might come to mind?
Well, first of all, I believe that every journalist should be a registered independent. Just want to say that. Because I think that that's the only fair approach to actually doing the news and reporting it fairly. I will say that I think that there's bias in the media, but it's not necessarily blatant bias. It's more bias about story selection and choosing not to do certain stories. So that's how it becomes biased. So when I worked at CBS News, pretty much all of our stories came from the front page of the New York Times. And some people would argue that that wouldn't be an entire representation of all the stories out there that might be of interest. So when I came to Fox News, they were covering stories that a lot of the other national media outfits were not, or outlets were not. For example, a lot of stories on patriotism, faith-based stories, which would not always be top of the list at other networks. And I think it's important to cover all of those kinds of stories. I think it's important to cover American history stories, school curriculum stories, the middle of the country stories. Oftentimes, those people feel completely left out by watching the national newscasts. And because I'm from the Midwest, I have a complete understanding of all of those people.
Well, and even that rude statement, the flyover states, right?
Yes,
just terrible, right?
Yikes,
Yeah.
we're people too.
Right, yeah.
But I always have every single day a debate, a political debate. And I have a Republican and a Democrat. And really, I should just be the moderator in the middle of that discussion. let me tell you, you can't please everyone. And that's the other great lesson I learned from my dad. Simplistic, but so true. Gretchen, no matter how hard you try, you're never going to get everyone to like you as much as you want that to be true. And that's especially true when I'm doing a political debate. Yeah. Because half of the audience will say, how could you side with the Democrat on that? And half the audience will say, how could you side with the Republican on that?
Which means you probably have it about right.
Well, exactly right. So, it is a delicate balance to try and not put a lot of your opinion into that debate.
Yeah, and yet still have your personality and be authentic. Yeah,
completely.
Many of us in the room have jobs that have a public presence, maybe not before millions of viewers, but we're involved in pitching a product or pitching our services. So we're on our feet and we're performing, not in a violin and at a concert level like you did, but we're performing our roles. And sometimes the performance can take on a life of its own. And you've commented that you enjoy performing. It gives you a certain buzz. I mean, if anyone's honest, there is a buzz to it. How do you balance, because I think many of us might think the same question, how do we balance the buzz and the energy and often the affirmation, even adulation we might get from performing with not believing our own press, somehow staying grounded, humble, and not sort of essentially getting too full of ourselves?
Again, a huge life lesson that I learned from my grandfather, humility. My grandfather never took a raise as a minister. Correct. And
you mean he didn't have a Gulfstream or a three like a few that we read about? Yeah.
No. And he was a huge liberal, and never ever did you know that from the pulpit, which is something I admired. Humility, I think, is one of the greatest life lessons that we can learn, especially in this whole era of entitlement. And our kids and the way in which we're raising them. I think, my husband and I believe that is, it could be after faith, the most important lesson. And it's why the last chapter in my book is entitled, To Whom Much is Given, Much is Expected.
Which comes from Luke, of course.
Of course. Giving back is part of that process of being humble and realizing that the world is not all about you, right? So I think that if there was one thing that I have tried to hold on tight to, is that my roots of my small town in Minnesota and remembering how my grandfather chose to live his life. And the greatest compliment, and a woman paid it to me tonight too, and I thank you again for that, is that she said, you are as real in person as you appear to be on TV, and thank you so much, because that means more to me than anything else that anyone could ever say to me. And it's really important to me that I have stayed true to who I was growing up.
As I work with different business leaders and just my own reflection, and if I'm honest and look in the mirror, it's not like one thing you go tick, got that sorted out. It's a daily process to stay anchored. In my business ethics class, I ask students, I build the course around 5 questions. And Q5, the final question is how do you stay ethically fresh? Not sassy, but sort of fresh, on your toes, not getting stale. How will you recognize that conflict of interest? How will you recognize when someone maybe is manipulating you? How do you avoid that temptation? Maybe you've had a drink too many, you're on the road, and how do you have techniques or tips or people in your life that help you say, Gretchen, whoa, you gotta relax a bit here. Do you have any of those things? They may be too personal, but
in my personal life or my professional life?
Either, yeah. I mean,
on my husband.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. No, he'll often say to me, I don't think you'll ever stop achieving goals.
Right. Because you're driven, right? Like most of us in this room are.
And he is too.
Yeah.
That's how we matched up.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's important to continue to always strive to achieve something. Again, it's one of the lessons in my book. No matter how old you are, we all have that list of things on Post-it notes, right, that we think we're going to get to. And it's really important to eventually get to some of those things on your list and to always continue to achieve. For a sports analogy, why do the best golfers in the world and the best tennis players, why do they adjust their swings?
Yeah.
They're already number one because they want to get better. They want to continue to challenge themselves. And that's the way that I look at life. Now, who keeps me in line at work? I've got a whole team of producers. And another important thing based on your former question is that it's so important in the workplace to realize that you're part of a team. And I'm sure that's true for all of us sitting here. And it's certainly true in television. I may be the one person sitting out there doing my show for an hour, but for goodness sake, if I didn't have the 30 to 40 people behind me on my team every day, I wouldn't be sitting there. And one of the benefits of traveling all over the country and living in so many different cities and working my way up was that I learned that lesson. And it factors into humility as well, right? Because you realize that you need all these people around you to be able to thrive and survive and succeed. And therefore, you're much more humble in that process. So, especially in TV, we have tons of opinions every single day. Well, what should we cover? Who should we interview? Who should we book for this? Well, I'm thinking about doing it from this point of view, and then my executive producer will say, well, no, because maybe that will be a conflict of interest, and maybe we should look at it from this point of view. And somebody else, another producer, will have a different idea. So it really is a coming together of the team. Not to mention when you actually do the actual broadcast, we have the technical people, the camera operators, the woman who's in charge of telling me my time cues, the entire staff of directors and technical people that are up in the control room. You know, it is a sincere team effort, and I think it's just so important to always respect all those positions and all of those roles, and they keep me in line.
And I think everyone has different ways of doing it, a mixture of a spouse and coworkers, but also letting people know that you're approachable, that you're willing for someone, and it's okay. They won't get fired if they come up and say, that wasn't the best move. Setbacks. When I was introducing you, I said that you didn't have a linear career. There were not many, but there were a few violin competitions at very elite levels that you could have, should have, maybe might have won if you had tried a bit harder, because you were at the beginning of the stage when you were perhaps shifting away from that. You got fired once, a week after you got married. What did you learn from some of the setbacks that now help both keep you anchored but also driven?
Mm-hmm. So you don't appreciate success unless you failed, right? And this is a lesson that I teach my kids every single day as well, that you want to fall on your face every once in a while. However, I didn't really want to fall on my face a week after
none of us want to, but we all say, I know it's good for me, but.
Well, let me tell you that it was a really kind of awful experience, because I had been promoted to be part of the first ever 2 female anchor team in primetime television at a local level. Nobody had ever tried that before. It was pretty much always, well, first it was always a male, but then it was a male and a female. And so the other woman was from Cleveland, where I was working at the time, and I was the newbie. So I go off and get married, come home from my honeymoon, and I get called up to the general manager's office. And I sort of had this feeling in my stomach, and
that it wasn't a raise he wanted to talk about.
No. And he said, it's just not working out. And I said, well, what's going to happen to the show? And he said, well, we're going to keep Denise, but we don't have another role for you, so we're going to have to let you go. And I got this pit in my stomach. And then he said the killer line, which was, but now that you're married, you'll be fine.
A collective ouch.
So not only was that illegal to say that,
exactly,
but it was not something that felt very good for me. So newly married, no job. The headlines were, horrible. Bye-bye, Miss America Pie. And it was really hard to deal with, because I really hadn't done anything wrong. I mean, not that would have made it easier.
So it wasn't a performance issue, wasn't an ethical breach, or
nothing. It was simply because
it's business.
Because I was a woman and it wasn't working out with 2 women together. I think he also added, and we're going to replace you with a man. So I did not have a job for a year. Toughest year of my life. And as we can all attest to, being married in the first year is a big enough of a transition, right?
And the second year, and the third year.
Well, yeah. And
Wait,
so,
happily married many years. I'm just playing around here, just playing around. And I'm sure Casey's a swell guy.
It's all about getting real. So anyway, I was not a fun person to live with the first year of marriage. And it was the most difficult period in my life. And I think I have great empathy for anyone who has ever lost their job. There's a certain amount of pain and shame that never leaves you. And I have great empathy for people who are currently, the millions of people in our economy right now who are currently looking for a job. And I knew that I was going to have to move away from my husband to get a job, because that's how it works in television. You don't just go up to the 35th floor for the next promotion or the new job. You've got to move to a new city. Yeah. So in the funny way that this world works with small world occurrences, the boss who was with me in Cleveland, she ended up going to work for NBC in Dallas. And she ended up hiring me in Dallas a year later. Oh. And so, that was a great way to get back on my feet. The bad part was that now I lived in Dallas and my husband lived in Cleveland. So our second year of marriage, we spent commuting to try and keep our relationship going. But I give a lot of advice in my book about how I got back on my feet and how other people can do the same thing if they've also gone through a traumatic thing like that.
I should ask you this offline, but my wife, Karen, used to be a lawyer, very accomplished, very intelligent, successful lawyer, and then a law professor. And she'd like to write a book now about couples who commute, and in particular couples who are of faith, and how does that play into that? We've met many, many couples who, for whatever professional reasons, have to commute, and it's a different dynamic. There's challenges to it as well. So let me ask you another question. It's a very personal one, and if you don't want to go, you don't have to, but it's, I'll bet at least 10 or 15%, maybe way more in the room have had this experience. Sexual harassment in the workplace, and you touch on it in your book. When you were in Richmond doing a story, there was a cameraman who really started groping you and saying really lewd things. Wow. Well, I know what you did then, but looking back now with a couple more years and confidence under your belt, what advice would you give men and women in the room who have this happen to them, or someone comes in their office and says, hey, this just happened to me, what should I do? What would you say?
Well, first of all, I hope that we've come a long way from that point in time 27 years ago.
Because that wasn't just like an off-color joke. This was...
No, I was actually assaulted twice as Miss America also before I was actually employed. And in those situations, I really had no recourse, because you don't go to the human resources office when you're Miss America. I mean, one of them happened in a car with a very high-powered television executive who had helped me all day long because I had decided I wanted to get into the TV business. I didn't know it came along with that at the end of the night. But we were in the back seat of the car, and he basically threw himself on top of me. And I won't get into all the lewd details, but that was a harrowing experience, one in which I was shattered afterwards. Sure. Like, is that all I'm worth? And then 6 months later in Los Angeles, I was out with an incredibly high-powered PR executive, and we were in a car together again. I don't know what it is about cars. And he took my head and he stuffed my head into his crotch. And I couldn't breathe. And 25 years later, that executive was walking through the hallways of Fox News.
Wow.
And he walked past my office, and I went back to that exact moment in time. And if any woman or man has gone through an experience like this, you know it, again, never leaves you. I was scared to death. I got up, I slammed my office door closed, and I thought, what am I going to do? He's here, he's here, he's here. And before I left for the day, I was like peering, like I was 10 again. I was peering outside of my office to make sure he wasn't in the hallway, because I didn't want to have to see him. So these kinds of experiences have long-lasting effect. When I was in the workplace with this cameraman, I had only been on the job for 6 months, and we were out in a rural area in Virginia, and we were in a car together again. And this is before cell phones. And I didn't know what to do. I actually envisioned myself opening the car door like in a movie and rolling out. And I was wondering how hurt I would get if I did that. Right. And we actually stopped at a gas station, and I could have called for help, but I didn't, because then it kicked in, I'll probably lose my job. So then I got back in the car with him and went back to the station, and I was like this, which normally was not my normal state. And my boss came up to me and said, what's wrong with you? And I said, nothing, nothing. And this went on and on and on until finally I decided to kind of tell him what had happened, But I think this is a big conundrum for women in the workplace, because there's still that stigma attached to women if they go and complain. And so people don't. And so I think the statistics that we hear about are not the true statistics, because tons of women are not doing that. I will just say that now corporations have sexual harassment training, and I know we go through it at Fox, and I think we've come a long way. And I'll just end the part of the discussion with saying that I always say that I work more for my son than I do for my daughter. My son is 10 and my daughter's 12. Because to change the way in which women are perceived in the workplace will take not only women being more proactive, but men understanding women and respecting them. And so I say that because I want my son in 12 years when he goes into the workplace to treat his female colleagues like he would his mother, who he watched when he was growing up working. So to me, it's men and women working together to stop this problem. I do think it's better, but I know that it still exists.
I appreciate sharing it because it's real. It still goes on, maybe in more veiled ways as well as horrible, blatant ways. But thank you for that encouragement. Let me ask a higher level question, and then we'll open it up for whatever questions people might have. I didn't mention that earlier, but part of our tradition is to take questions from the floor for a few minutes. So we'll do that in a minute. But you saw earlier when I introduced this that our fall series for GLF is going from words to action, going from words to action. You touched a bit on that earlier. Your whole job is about words, right? It's and communicating thoughts and ideas through the spoken word. How do you think a bit in your profession, your line of work, about going from words to work?
Words to action?
Sorry, words to action. I can't remember my own question. Good thing you're here. By the way, you need to realize that to interview, a professional interview is not easy.
Well, I think I'll just go back to one of the big messages in my book and in my life, which is I am a person of conviction. And so I would like to think that my words are always followed up by the appropriate action. And again, back to what my father told me, that people will know who you are as a person, specifically a Christian, by the way in which you act. So you can say words, but if you don't follow it up with the way in which you live your life, it really doesn't matter. And that's very simplistic, but to me, it's something I think about every single day.
And for all of our respective lines of work, it's going to look a little different, won't it? Some of us, of course, may not have a big TV audience, but there's still how do we carry ourselves and what does it look like in the game, whatever our line of work might be, whether we're an analyst, whether we're in technology, sales, et cetera. There's one other point to me, was one of the overarching themes of your book and therefore probably your life that I'd like you to talk to, if you don't mind, and then we'll take some questions. And that is, you talk about sort of where do we get our worth from? And maybe a Christian might say, well, ultimately from God and God's love of me. But you also talk about it from the inside. Could you talk a bit about what do you mean when you say it doesn't matter what all the blog people say. It doesn't matter whether it's praise or criticism you're getting. It's this inside voice. Would you comment on that, please? Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the other struggles I had as a child was that I struggled with my weight. So I was a fat kid. So I was used to hearing the taunts and the teasing. And I was forced to build my self-esteem from the inside of my soul as a result. And you know what? Thank goodness. Huge life lesson for our kids today, especially with social media and with photoshopping and unrealistic expectations of what they're supposed to grow up to be and look like. And because I was fat, I was forced to really look inside the inner me and determine who I was. And through that, I found somebody who did well at school, somebody who excelled in music, something that no one could ever take away from me. That is a huge self-confidence builder. And my faith. It forced me to find, ask myself questions about who I was, much more so than somebody who wasn't struggling with their image at such a young age. And then you ask, how does a chubby kid end up being Miss America?
A lot of work.
Never on my radar screen. No, but it was all because of my violin. Yeah. Half of my points were based on talent. And again, using that self-confidence, never being in pageants before, and figuring out, how could I possibly try and win this thing? So I think
I feel sorry for the other contestants, actually.
No.
Stanford educated. No, I'm sorry.
Every year there are tremendous contestants, and it's a subjective
Well, actually, you've
thing.
lifted that a lot, but your role on the board to really accent it's not just running around in a bathing suit. It's the talent, it's the skill, it's a lot.
Well,
of
in case
things.
you hadn't noticed, I'm short. I forgot to mention that one too. So I knew I wasn't going to win the swimsuit competition, so I had to bring something else to the table. And by the way, my grandfather, who I revered so much, he told me, "You know what, Gretchen? You will never be Miss America." And I said, "Well, why not?" As I was killing myself in the basement and running 5 miles a day. "Well, you're too short." And I said, "All right, well, I don't think they judge you actually on height." But so I went to the library before the internet, and I looked up every book I could find on Miss America and height. And I went to the table of contents, and bless her soul, the very first Miss America, Margaret Gorman in 1921, was 5'1".
Woo-hoo. All right. So who'd like to ask a question? And one of our protocols is if you could have the question be short and be a question and not a statement, then we can get more people to say things. So why don't you come in first?
Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, John.
You were a real inspiration, and I loved your story, and I'm going to look forward to reading your book.
Thank you.
My question is really, in our family, we believe that good things come in small packages. So you're one example of that.
Thanks.
But when you survey the scene, and this is really on a macro, where do you see us as a country today from where you sit?
So John asked a very simple question. Where do you see our country today from where you sit? So take a crack at that.
Well, listen, I am a product of the American dream. And I believe in it 120%. And what makes me sad is that recent polls show that fewer Americans think that today. And that's really changed over the last decade. So it used to be that when you would ask Americans in a poll, do you think you'll live a life better off than those who preceded you? They would say yes, because they had that verve inside of themselves that they were going to achieve and make it and keep moving forward. So what's happened? And that we could answer for the next 10 hours. But I just want to say that I'm a huge believer in the American dream, and we got to keep teaching our kids that that is the option, the only option.
Thank you. Let me go side to side. Patrick.
I grew up in television. My father turned on Channel 30 in 1952 and stayed with 42 years. And I was senior vice president for CNN in Europe for many years, too. I'm a big fan of you and Fox. Most of my colleagues have moved back to the United States have left CNN and actually are Fox and Friends fans. I particularly love Fox and Friends, and we were on Fox and Friends. So
Bring us to your question now, Patrick.
No disrespect, but I wanted to know, did you like leaving Fox and Friends and going on your own show? I love your show too, but what you had with Brian, I mean,
My work husbands?
Magic television.
Oh, well, thank you so much for saying that. I did Fox and Friends for 8 years. The beauty now is that I don't have to set 3 alarm clocks that go off at 3:35 a.m. I never overslept, which is actually kind of amazing.
We had 3 of them.
Well, still, I had 2 babies during that whole time and transition. But I loved doing that show. It was my dream to one day do a national morning show. And it made my mom so happy because when I was covering all these serious stories as I was working my way up from Richmond to Cincinnati to Cleveland to Dallas to New York, I would send her tapes. And she would say, "Oh, Gretchen, I think you're doing a fine job, but could you just smile a little more so people could get to know the real you and the difference in your personality?"
Our mom's great.
And I'd say, "Mom, I'm covering murders and fires. I can't be up there cracking jokes." So she really, really, really loved it when I got to Fox and Friends because I was doing hard news and more lighthearted segments. But when well, thank you. But when my boss came to me after 8 years and said, "Would you like to sleep in and have your own show, which from a professional point of view was a step up as well," I had to say yes, and especially because of my kids. They really started to need me more at night. And my son would stay up all night long and watch ESPN if I was not there and able to stay up after after him and make sure that he's actually asleep. And they need me more. They need me more for school.
He got all the brackets right.
He did, and now he's helping me with the football brackets.
How about from this side, the gentleman there?
Yeah, thank you, Gretchen. I'll keep my question short. Actually, I have 2 questions that are linked.
He's a reporter if he has 2 questions, right?
Rest in the appropriate time. How do you keep your daily faith current? You know, what do you do? Daily devotion, prayer. You know, how do you keep close to God? And then, what's the first thing you do when you're in the public persona, doing your job, to really just, you know, be you, be a Christian, be.
So first question is, do you have any daily rhythms, patterns that help keep your faith going?
Yes.
And the other is, when you're actually in the job, how do you keep that?
So there are 3 Bible verses that I printed them out here, but I have them in tiny print. I'm still old-fashioned. I have a day book. I just can't go to that calendar. I still want to see it and be able to write it down. And so anyway, I tape these Bible verses on my day book, and so I look at them constantly throughout the day, and I'll just share them with you. Galatians 6:9, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up.
So that's your perseverance going again.
Isaiah 41:10, fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And Psalm 27:1, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? So these are the 3 verses that I read consistently throughout the day. And I say the Lord's Prayer a bunch of times a day. I say it every day before my show starts. And I have said it for every endeavor that I have ever done, whether I'm walking out on stage or I can still see myself waiting to go perform my violin at the Miss America pageant and thinking of my grandmother, who had also played the violin and had died much too young. And she was not there to be with me. And I thought of her and said the Lord's Prayer. I can still see where I was standing when I did it. So,
Thank you. I think it's this side of the room now. John?
I just wanted to ask, while he comes from a different part of Christianity than you do, I think one of the problems the last few years is that we've had a lot of bureaucracy in religions that have caused a lot of problems in many different ways. What do you think of Pope Francis coming to the U.S.? Do you think, is that going to raise the faith level of everybody, whether you're Lutheran, Catholic, Quaker, or whatever? Or what's your view of him?
So the impact of the Pope coming to the U.S., regardless of what Christian or any tradition you might be, will he lift all boats or something?
I hope so. I mean, I think he's been a fantastic Pope from a news point of view, because he definitely pushes the envelope. And one of the things I liked about him, a couple of weeks ago, I had just returned from Italy, actually, and he decided to name a square after Martin Luther. And that was huge.
That's radical.
And I grew up a Lutheran. I'm now Presbyterian, but I loved the fact that he, somebody who was excommunicated from the Catholic Church was now being honored with a square in Rome. I mean, leave it up to this Pope to do something like that. So I do think it will raise a national conversation about faith in our lives, and whether or not you're Catholic, it doesn't really matter. And if you are, fantastic too. But I think we need to have more conversations like that. I really, really, really do. The spiritual state of the union is much more important to me.
What is your thoughts on euthanasia?
No, that's a trick question.
Yes.
Because he's read my book.
So I'll repeat the question. What are your thoughts on euthanasia?
So when I was preparing for the Miss America pageant, you go through tons of mock interviews. At least you should, if you want to try and win. And one of the very first questions in a mock interview was that question. And I thought that it was youth in Asia. So I said, I think it's fantastic that we have a lot of youth in Asia. Trust me, I know what it means now.
Please, yes.
So it seems like these days elections are as much about media outlet against media outlet as they are politician against politician sharing ideas. Do you talk about that all behind the scenes, and if so, how does it affect your approach?
No.
So it seems that more and more the elections are about media outlet versus media outlet and not politician to politician. Do you talk about it behind the scenes?
You know why Fox isn't talking about anyone else? Because we're killing the competition. I'm sure that MSNBC and CNN are talking about us. But we double their viewership with all of our shows. So I do agree with you that it's become very partisan in nature, especially the cable outfits. But that was actually the brilliance of our founder, was creating the idea of having opinion TV in prime time. First person to do it. Fox was the first place. So even if you didn't agree with Bill O'Reilly, you still might watch because it just made you mad and you wanted to hear what the other point of view was, or maybe you did agree with him. And that was brilliant because what he figured out was that during the day people were already getting their news headlines. And so by the time they got home at night, they wanted to see opinion. And so if that's created now sort of these, different sects of groups that have differing opinions and that we're battling each other, that may be the case. But so far, Fox is winning that battle.
Let's go to the way back. The lady in the white, please.
Hi, Gretchen. Thank you for being here tonight. Love hearing your story. Quick question. What inspired you to write your book?
Say it again, please.
What inspired you to write your book?
What inspired you to write your book, Gretchen?
I wanted people to know the real me underneath. And sometimes people look at television personalities and they think, wow, they've never had any problems in life. Everything's just come really easy. They got that golden phone call one day, hey, you want to come to New York and be a star? And that was certainly not my life path at all. I've killed myself for every opportunity and every goal that I've attained. And I wanted people to know that about me. I wanted them to know the side of faith that's so important to me. I wanted them to know how much I value being a parent and how I really believe that each and every one of us is born with a special gift, and it just takes cultivating it. And I really just wanted to inspire people to, like I said, go for those things that are on their Post-it note that you just haven't gotten around to. And by the way, I'm putting myself on that list because I really need to go back to the violin, and I just haven't really done that yet. So writing the book for me was also cathartic in the sense that I now know that I really need to return to my music.
In fact, you say in the book that one of your biggest life regrets is when you were fired and had that year in transition, that you didn't have the discipline to use that window of time to re-engage your music, if I recall.
Well, it was too painful to go back to something that I had already given up, that I would never be as good as when I was 14 or 15 years old. I was already experiencing so much pain, but in retrospect, I should have gone back to it because it was my soul.
Right.
And I didn't.
Your soul, beautiful. Let's go to the way back here. Is there someone, and if not, you're closest to the way back.
Great. What would you say are the upsides and downsides of the 24/7 news cycle?
Upsides and downsides of 24/7 news cycle.
The upsides are that it is never boring. It's something new every single day, every single minute. I mean, there are times when we have prepared our entire show, and what we say in the TV business is that the entire show is killed because breaking news happens, and the 7 or 8 interview segments that I've already prepared for and written all my questions for and researched go out the window, and now I'm just on the fly. And that is exhilarating for somebody in my profession. It's happened a lot recently. Yesterday we had the woman in Kentucky who's the clerk who didn't want to sign the marriage licenses. She was released from jail. And you had 2 presidential contenders there. So that was breaking at the time. So everything else went out the window yesterday, everything that we had planned. The downside is that you're always trying to find something that is newsworthy to make people want to watch you, right? And so I think that has changed. Cable news has changed the way in which we see news as a result of that. You know, at the networks, they only have to fill a morning show and 23 minutes at night. And I think it's far more exhilarating to do what we do. And by the way, you have to learn how to do what we do. So you come over there, and all those national news anchors probably would have to re-figure out and relearn how to do cable news. Because I'll never forget one of the first times when I started at Fox, they came in my ear and they said, oh, they've just made an arrest in the assassination of the Syrian president, so just go with this for 3 minutes. I was like, who are they even talking about? So that was my entree into cable news. You have to learn how to just go with it and be able to ad-lib your way out of a paper sack.
Well, thank you. We'll do one last question. How about the lady here on this side? Yes, yes, please. Oh, I didn't see you, Joe. I didn't recognize the lights. Hi.
Every woman who's a working mother struggles with guilt. If you were in an elevator with a woman and you were completely unfiltered, what would you say to this working mother?
So Jill's just asked, what advice would you give to a working mother who feels guilt, presumably the guilt that she's at her place of work as opposed to being at home with raising the children in a full-time? Or either way, take it however you want.
First of all, I say it outright right in the book, so I don't even have to be in an elevator. I feel like this whole women having it all thing is a curse.
Agreed.
Because, again, it's an unrealistic expectation that women and men can never, ever live up to. So I'm not saying that I don't believe women shouldn't be able to do everything and anything, because I for sure believe that. But we just can't do it all at the same time. It's unrealistic. So what I say in the book is, when I'm at work, I'm giving 100% to work. But guess what? I'm not giving 100% to my kids then. And when I go home, I'm giving 100% to my kids. And guess what? I'm not giving 100% to my work. So that is the reality. The way I like to look at it is that we can have it all, just not all at the same time. And I think if we could come to that conclusion in our society, it would take the guilt away from women especially, but also men, who feel like they're always on that hamster ring, wheel, trying to make sure that they're making it all work. It's unrealistic.
Thank you. Well, so with that, I thank you, and can we all give a round of applause to